I already know a lot about Universal Cinematic Spectacular. The one thing that dawned on me tonight, listening to you talk about it and hear a lot of the same things, is that I don't know the specifics of how sort of you sat down, picked out the clips. Did you go through archives of film, DVDs, etc.? What was it like when you went out to California to work with Universal Pictures?
Well, again, it was initially very daunting to be handed a show that has to encapsulate 100 years of Universal and all the films that entails. The really cool thing is that I and some others are already coming to the table with a vast knowledge of the Universal brand and these films. But it initially started with a kind of a review of the original 360 show. What worked in that show? What could we change about that show? How could we structure it differently? But for me, and this really goes with a lot of the things that I do here for this company, if there is music involved, I usually start with that first. I'll start with the music. I'll lay that bed down in a just a GarageBand type app and kind of create the show just musically first. Figure out what the emotions are that we want to kind of take the audience on, and then using the music, that kind of form the narration. That Casper score, that is at the opening of the show. The piano piece that's in there. I mean, that as soon as I heard that piece, I saw film strips, and I knew that okay, I need to do something with that because it feels very flowing. It's something that as an opening to the show to kind of draw the guest in would be a really great visual piece, and again, very different than how we opened the 360 show. Right. But then the task is, again, how do you pick the films? What do you do? Working with Universal Picks was the best thing in the world because they opened the doors to us. They gave us two amazing editors to work with that are on staff with them year-round that produce many of the trailers and EPK and DVD materials that come out. One of them is edited a couple American Pie films. So they're coming to the table with their talent and their knowledge of the brand and the technical aspect. And for me, it was more about trying to get them involved in how we want to tell our story using these clips. Because montages are montages, but right. It's how are you going to edit them to make them different and to really provide them with a certain emotion that's going to make it feel different for the guest. Right. And beyond that, different from the 360 show. Because we didn't want this to feel like, well, they just redid the 360 show. This had to be completely different.
At what point during the process did you come to the realization that you wanted to sort of separate it into 100 years of this and the different genres as opposed to just kind of onslaught of clips for 20 minutes?
The music helped a lot, kind of arranging those tracks, and they kind of formed the genre for me. And it was just kind of applying a title to that. And we knew what the feeling was. When you hear Prelude and Cape Fear, you know that's going to be the horror section. You hear it's the battle track from Gladiator, and that has again, it's, even when you listen to scores, they take on beyond the film itself. There's an emotional value to that piece of music, sure, beyond maybe the image you remember from the movie. So that really helped in kind of defining how we wanted to arrange the show. And obviously the bigger pieces of music, the sweeping score from E.T. When you hear that theme for the first time, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that you had to show E.T. There had to be a huge moment with E.T. there because right. I think that's what everyone would expect when you hear that music. I know for a lot of it was what would I want to see? What would all our creative staff that here, what would they want to see as a movie fan up there on that curtain?
But at the same time, you use the Back to the Future score, showing a lot of other movies on top of that.
Yeah, well, and that score again, Back to the Future, you're gonna feel Back to the Future the entire time because you're hearing that score, but it's also a very heroic sounding score. It was picking and choosing tracks that would pay homage to the film they're from, but also separate itself when we needed it to provide a bed for other films that take on the same attribute of being heroic, or horrific, or being funny. Right. But Universal Picks was amazing during this process. Again, the time they spent, if there were clips that we had that weren't currently in high definition, when we picked the select that we needed, they would convert it, they would remaster it, they would clean it up, just that section if it didn't exist yet.
Which is much like what they're doing going through the catalog anyway on a lot of their, the 100 years of films.
Yeah, there's 13 titles they're putting out. I think they've already released All Quiet on the Western Front, To Kill a Mockingbird. They just released Pillow Talk. Frankenstein is getting the complete remastered high definition treatment. Dracula, and the Spanish version of Dracula as a separate title is getting an upgrade, which have you ever seen the Spanish version of Dracula?
No.
It is the coolest story. The director, this is totally not about this, I'm sorry, but I got to talk about it. The director of the Spanish version of Dracula would sit and watch the English version during the day and just take tons of notes, learning from their goals, but also learning from their mistakes.
Right.
And he fashioned a different, still the same story relatively, but looks completely different. He changed the lighting, he changed some of the scenes or how people are blocked. It's a really kind of bizarro version of Dracula that is just awesome. Jaws E.T. is coming out later this summer. So yeah, I mean, this year is Universal, so it couldn't have happened at a better time that we were able to do a new show.
Well, you're mentioning films. Obviously, probably the majority of people out there have never seen the Spanish version of Dracula, and watching the Cinematic Spectacular, there's probably a lot of films in there that the average park goer here has never seen. Do you feel like they're still going to find an emotional connection, whether it's from the score or the fireworks or the fountains or anything, even in those moments where they're like, oh, I don't know what that movie is?
I think so. I think we've been able to support the edit with content that surrounds the guest, that no matter if they don't have an emotional tie to a certain movie, I think that we've supported that film or that clip enough with using the fountains and the pyro and the lighting that you can't help but strike a chord in some manner. I mean, I think that goes with any show or any movie you've never seen before. You kind of you gotta live with it for a second or two to be able to really give it that resonance that it needs. I mean, anything that anyone sees that's brand new, they're going into it not knowing, but they're leaving feeling something. I think this takes on the exact same framework.
So did you leave California with a more or less completed edit, and then you moved on to the rest, or was it many trips back and forth?
Many trips. I have Sky Miles throughout. I've got more Sky Miles than I've ever had in my life. Yeah. It was many back and forth trips, many edits, many versions of the show. Because again, it's not all just about our theme park needs. It's also about making sure that we're representing the Universal brand effectively. And that was also important with Universal Picks. And one of the main reasons why we wanted to be involved with them as closely as we were with this project is we wanted to make sure that we were doing their brand, the Universal brand, justice. Because theme park realm is very different than the film realm. But it was kind of taking both talents and attributes and combining them and using them to create the best product possible that speaks to the brand that is Universal.
And on that note, do you think this show sort of ties the park together a little bit better than it has in the past? I mean, there's a lot of, this movie and that movie, and they don't really go together. Do you feel like this is sort of like bringing it all together at the end of the day?
I think that's what every park guest wants in a theme park experience. I think you really want to have an end-of-day experience that kind of caps the day that is Universal. You hear these when you enter the park through the arches. You're hearing these scores as you begin your day, pieces and parts, not complete scores. They're they're montage type edits of the music when you go through the arches, and I think that sticks with you a little bit. I mean, this still started out as a movie studio. But these are backlots, and I think that's important to keep that mindset alive within the park, and that this show then ends your day with some of those similar scores and those motifs. And everything that goes into a nighttime show, pyrotechnics, and the spectacle of it all. I mean, that's something that every theme park needs, and it was just a question of how is Universal gonna do a really impactful end of day show, and I think that's what we've achieved.
One more question. I think most people know you from your work on Horror Nights over the years. Compare, contrast your work on that with the process of creating this Lagoon show.
Oh man.
Do you start with a score on Horror Nights ever, or does it, the actual process of developing sort of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to that old adage of what would I want to see as a. I mean, this show was more of as a all-encompassing film fan. For Horror Nights is what would I want to see as a horror fan? Right. What experiences do I? The horror event is it's a visceral feeling. It is really putting those guests into a confined environment that's immersive. Whereas the Lagoon show is a much more open experience. It's much more vast. But I think the elements are the same. It's kind of picking out what you'd want to see. It's choosing the moments that will resonate. At the same time, putting in some moments that people will not expect but have a lot of fun with. Right. So it really does kind of take on the same kind of track. I think any creative project around here follows a very, very succinct skeleton. you know, but then how do you move that skeleton? What are you putting onto those bones to kind of create, you know, the unique experience that you're trying to create?